not quite right. I can tell you my first open source contribution, I was using some software, it had a bug in it. It really was causing me some grief, so I fixed it. Then I posted that I had made some changes to this software. And my first payment in the world of open source was someone from 3M downloaded my source code and started using it, who was very annoyed by the same software problem. And he was so pleased by what I did, which really was very simple and trivial, that he sent me a case of Post-it notes of all different sizes and colors. And this was kind of 15 years ago. And I've never had to buy any Post-it notes during this whole interval. I still have some. So in some ways, that was my most satisfying open source contribution. This guy really was grateful, I guess. Quite an impressive box of Post-it notes.
That's great. Anybody else? Questions?
In your experience, who is mainly contributing to open source? People just at free time after their job, or people who are spending most of time doing open source?
Who wants to go first?
So speaking from the WordPress community, we have a combination of people from all over, sort of varying levels of involvement with very different backgrounds. So we have quite a few students, actually, who are contributing in some way or another. Often it's because they've sort of gotten started early with programming or development of some sort, and a lot of them just use WordPress for their personal site, and then they find something that bugs them, so they fix it, and then they get involved. So we have a reasonably good contingent of students, and actually the Summer of Code has helped get a few more, which is great. We have quite a few sort of consultants or people who work at agencies and things like that, where they use WordPress as sort of the way that their agency makes money. So it's part of their living that WordPress needs to be solid. And so it's in their best interest to make sure that WordPress keeps moving forward so they contribute back to the project. And then we have, well, within Automatic, we have, I think it's 5 full-time employees who all they do is contribute to the open source project. I mean, the whole company does in one way or another pretty much, but we only have a few people who are actually dedicated that's all they do. So we have heaps of people who do a little bit here and there after some sort of a day job. And I would say that those people and the students actually tend to be the most valuable people for our community. If you could sort of put a label on who's doing the best things, because the people with commercial interests are often driving those commercial interests, whereas the people who are just fixing something for themselves, or they're contributing out of a passion for the project, they're more interested in the project succeeding for its own sake, rather than, you know, to do something specific that they need to do so that they can sell it.
So a bunch of projects very similar to WordPress, a very, very diverse community of all kinds of people, all kinds of different work and life situations and ages, all that. I think a lot of people end up getting involved in a bunch of projects. A lot of us are people that I work with are full-time working on something else, but then our life changes once we get involved in open source. We might make career decisions based on that. I know a number of community members end up getting hired by Canonical, which is a company that funds Ubuntu and holds the trademarks. And then there's a lot of, like the job that I have, my boss is very friendly towards open source. All we use is open source. So it benefits the company to send me to developer summits on paid time off, so I don't have to take vacation time. And so I think a lot of us, we end up making career choices that allow us to, you know, take an hour in the middle of our day to attend an open source meeting on IRC or something. So we end up having very flexible, some of us have flexible jobs, so we can use a lot of time, or a lot of our free time to work on the project, but also have a full-time job that, you know, makes sure we eat. So.
I think it's important to remember too that so much of the technology that makes the world work now is, to a greater or lesser extent, we won't talk about the specifics of open source licensing, but so much software is open source now. So if you're working in technology or with technology, the odds are good that you will be using open source software to one extent or another. Then the question is that what you're being paid for, contributing back to the open source? I have noticed over the last 10 years just an explosion of jobs to work on open source commits as part of your work. I would argue that I think the majority of projects people commit for love rather than money. But I think that's going to continue to shift as more and more commercial technology companies and companies that use technology, aka all of them, move to an open source platform.
Just on the way through, if I may, having something like a GitHub log or being able to point to a project log where you can say like, these patches were done by me, or I submitted these tickets, I helped this project in some way, fantastic for a resume these days. I've heard multiple people say that they will take a commit log over a resume any day, especially for developers.
Can you define what a commit log is?
Sorry, yeah, so basically it's the record of, specifically for a commit log, it's the record of you contributing code in some way to a project. But most projects have some concept of a profile, or like this is a person involved within the community. So within WordPress you have a profile page which lists like if you've created plugins, if you've got any themes to your name, if you have what's called props, which means you submitted a ticket with a patch and then that patch was included by a core committer. So they'll say like, Bo wrote this patch, so he gets props. So having that record is a fantastic thing to show potential employers as well.
I do think it's true that if you look at the lines of code that are committed to open source projects that actually make up the software that you run, most of it is written by paid people. But I think just looking at that as a metric totally undervalues the importance of the contribution that volunteers make. And the reason is that companies don't pay people to do all the things that they should pay people to do. They don't really pay ordinary people, for example, who don't love technology like we do, to test the software. They very often don't pay enough people to write documentation. They won't pay accountants to test accounting software. They pay testing professionals to test it. To the extent that open source software has an ugly user interface, is confusing to use, and is poorly documented, it's because companies underinvest in those areas. Now, I guess you could say maybe they don't pay people to do those things because volunteers do it. But I think actually open source software would be buggier, less usable, and completely undocumented if it weren't for volunteers. Volunteers organize community events and meetings. They are critical to the functioning of the system. And the community cannot operate without them, beyond which they're where new paid people come from, almost always. So I think it really gets back to the idea that it's the community that makes open source possible. It's such a cliche, and I think you have to really be involved in the undertaking to see how true it is. When I see somebody else with a Linux t-shirt, I feel like we are going to be friends. And I just, much more than somebody who went to my college or plays the sport I play or something. I mean, it's really a passion, a bond of passion, and it's not quite like anything else. Live here in Silicon Valley, you can really let your freak flag fly that way, and you don't have to be a coder to do it. Like I said, the door's open. Come and join the party.
One last question.
Yeah, hi. I'm Lina Green. I'm with Internet Systems Consortium that runs open source for Find and software that is critical to the internet. So they've pioneered also another wave of open source into what's called a managed open source environment to take care of some of the things that you talked about, documentation, support services, to make sure the internet doesn't break. So this leads me to this question. All of you have talked a little bit about talent and how people get involved in this community. What are some of the areas you would consider good places to find the right talent of open source test engineers or open source coders? And the second question I have is, as we're attracting the younger generation to come in, where are some of the sources we could go to hire interns, for example, for open source?
You guys didn't apply for open source to be a mentoring org? I mean, for Summer of Code, did you?
We did.
You did?
We did.
Did we accept you?
No, last year, yeah, for NTP Network Time Protocol.
Okay, good. So I would say get involved with Google Summer of Code because it's a great place to find passionately interested students. Bit of a non sequitur here, but Sri Lanka has extraordinary programming talent. Some of our most passionately involved Summer of Code students come from Sri Lanka. I don't know, is that nationalist to name a country? Anyway, bad cat.
They've got a long tradition of technical training in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. The presidents of the universities get in touch with us to ask us to make sure to do outreach to their students. Frankly, I go back to projects where you feel that the technology is working well and has a stable community environment and a good history of quality code and all the other things as well, and look around there.
I guess I could recommend, if you have the time to do the legwork, go to Linux users group meetings and go to small events and gatherings where you can meet people. A lot of them are really happy to have you come in front before their meeting and say, hey, we're hiring, or we're looking for interns, because a lot of people can end up being, they're looking for work and you want to find people. And a lot of developers go to things like Linux users groups and things, so definitely, that might be, I mean, it's time consuming, you have to go and on an evening, do that. Also conferences sometimes you can go to. I was at the Southern California Linux Expo a couple weeks ago, and tons of companies had booths. I mean, even Facebook was there recruiting. So there are definitely companies going to these kinds of open source events and putting their name out there and saying that they're definitely interested in hiring.
And the student organizations, ACM, Usenix, IEEE, maybe not, things like that.
I would definitely second the idea of going to local community groups if there's a group around whatever it is that you're specifically hiring for. For example, I run the San Francisco WordPress meetup, and we are trying to start making it a regular thing where basically at one point we just say, who's hiring and who's looking to get hired. You've got 3 minutes each to pitch yourself for whatever, like whether you're hiring or trying to be hired. So I'd say definitely try them out. That's your sort of local pool of people who are self-selectively interested in whatever it is that you're looking for. So they've already done the work for you, if you like. And then if we're going to name places, I would also name Bulgaria. Bulgaria is actually the second densest place of people working for Automatic.
Wow.
We have three employees in Sofia, Bulgaria.
And you get to go to Sofia.
Not yet, but I hope so.
So I have a question about security. So I want to know if there's a higher chance of being hacked because it's been open source, the fact the source was available versus closed source. So I'm just curious about that.
So I would say, I'm gonna start on this since I've got the mic in my hand. I would say this is a long-held misperception by the public, perpetuated by people who make closed source software. Maybe I'm going to get into a religious debate here, probably not. But basically, the source being available actually makes it way more secure because it means that you can have all of these anonymous third parties basically reviewing your code for you. The bulk of, taking WordPress as an example, I mean, I will be the first to admit we've had security problems in the past. Every project has. Windows has. Everything has, whether it's open or closed. The majority of security bugs found in open source software are probably found by someone who's not a regular core committer. Quite likely, they're found by someone who is like, oh, hey, this is insecure, and tells someone, and you know what, it gets fixed. And that's the crucial difference, is that it actually gets fixed. And that they know, they can submit a patch and say, here's how you fix it. Here's how I fix this problem on my site, or my router, or my whatever. And that's the crucial difference.
And I'd like to point out that with the closed source software, if there is a security issue, you don't know how long that's been out there necessarily. I don't have stats at my fingertips, but my belief is that open source or security holes are revealed and fixed much faster in the open source ecosystem.
Yeah. Security vulnerabilities is one of my areas. I don't know if we have the data for that, but one of the advantages of open source that I'm telling a lot of people that you can get is, especially if it's an active community, is that an organization to say, okay, I'm going to use that production in my organization, you can do full, what we call white box testing. So in other words, you can take and, okay, let me stress it, let's whack it, let me do my own security test and let me do my own penetration testing people in. And then when you find something, you can see the source. And then you don't even have to tell, like, usually active organizations like WordPress has a security team. They can say, hey, here's a security fix, and you submit it, and they'll do the patch, and the patch rolls out. And then you tell everybody. So because you can actually have a system there, especially when you get open source in like data, like power systems and lights and things like that, it's a big advantage to the industry that you can actually pull the open source project in, do all the testing, you find the bugs, you can see them, and you can get a process to get them fixed quicker. And you're not in there, black box where you don't know what's inside. And black box is why I just tested it. It's just a black box. I don't know what's inside. Right? So it has a big advantage too, especially when you get to critical systems. Yeah.
Just to amplify on that a little bit, consider today, I don't know whether it will turn out to be true or not, but there was a scandal about keylogging in Samsung products and their software. And I just make the comment, if something is closed source, you don't know what's in it. China, for example, has its own distribution of Linux now called Red Flag. And why do you think they don't want to use they don't want to use a closed source operating system? Well, why wouldn't the US government say, put spyware in it? I wouldn't trust it if I were them. I'd want to compile the operating system and the blogging software and whatever I'm using myself if I were somebody with a real security concern. Because that's really important. I do think, I'm not sure myself if you consider, for example, the phone network, should all the drivers for all the devices be open source? Should we let anybody get on the cell towers that wants to? Maybe that's not a good idea. So I think these questions aren't simple, and maybe there are areas where closed source is appropriate. But certainly, I feel good knowing that someone who's, in some sense, in my community and in my network has reviewed all the source code that's currently running on my hardware that has my data on it that I don't want to share with people. There is no keylogging software running on my system. I'm completely confident. So that, that's at least one less thing to worry about.
So real quick, actually, that keylogging thing is very funny because it turns out it's not true.
I thought it might not be.
So they came out today. So it was proprietary. It was Windows, and they thought they had installed it, but it turns out it was like, I don't remember. It was like a security detection software was malfunctioning or something. But they released all these articles yesterday. It was a whole thing. Oh my gosh, Samsung is shipping keyloggers, and they proved that this was true because a manager that they talked through tech support said, oh yeah, we're putting that on the systems to get statistics back. I don't know if they still have a job, but it turns out that was but no one knew when they were reporting the article that was their proof because they didn't have the source of it. They couldn't look to see that there was a keylogger being
We all
shipped.
believed it.
Yeah, but I learned today. I
plausible.
tweeted about it yesterday, and I felt really silly. But yeah, so and then another really quick thing there was another incident recently where a SSL certificate company was compromised in some way, and it was never announced by them. A bunch of patches started going into Chrome and Firefox, and someone looking at the changelog was like, why are they all of a sudden blacklisting all these SSL certificates, and why haven't I heard this? So he ended up posting like a whole blog post all about it, and it went all through the security community that this was happening. And it was never really said, but it was someone watching the change logs for these things that discovered it and notified people that things were happening. So.
And just another quick point on what Barry was saying earlier about being able to test something in a white box environment and see what's going on, and then be able to submit a patch or at least notify the people who are able to fix this. The other big benefit there is before anybody else knows about it, your system can be patched. So at least you know you're secure. And then you contact the security people within whatever project, and then they can patch the project and then get it out to everyone, hopefully before the wider community knows that there's this vulnerability. You don't have that opportunity. If someone finds a buffer overflow in Windows, you can't do anything about that until they decide to release a patch.
The biggest problem we have whenever we have a vulnerability is panic. Where people go like, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on, I don't have enough information, and I gotta upgrade my systems really, really, really quick. The advantage of open source is when they say, here's a vulnerability, you pull up the source, you see exactly what's going on, you can make a risk assessment and say, okay, for me and my organization, I don't need a patch right away, I can patch in the weekend.
Yeah.
Right? And it makes it easier for the industry with it. So there's an advantage with open source. That's another one with it, because you can see whether you need to patch.
All right, let's have a big hand for this awesome